Hi first graders, it's Heron from the Westport River Watershed Alliance, and we're back in the vernal pool to check out what kinds of things are going on here and to learn a little bit more about some of the interesting plants that live around the vernal pool and some that even grow on top of the surface of the vernal pool when there's water in it. At this time of year, as it starts to get cooler, we might expect to see some water in the vernal pool. We have recently had a few warmer days, so I think some of it has dried out. So there is actually still no water in the bottom of the vernal pool right now. It is a little bit wetter where the leaves are, so that has gotten a little bit different. As the season changes and it gets a little bit colder, we expect that when it rains, the water should stay in the vernal pool and not evaporate out as quickly as it was in the past. Some of the plants that we're going to take a close-up look at have different adaptations, which is a special part that they have that helps them to survive in their habitat. And we'll talk about some of the adaptations that those plants have. So the first plant we're going to take a look at is called moss. And moss is not the same as the typical plants that you think about because it actually has no roots. So it attaches to a rock or a tree, the bark of a tree, and then instead of using roots to take water up through the plant, it actually absorbs water through its leaves, and it also takes in nutrients that way. The other cool thing about moss is it's not a flowering plant, which means it doesn't have a flower, and it also doesn't make any seeds. Instead, it puts up a little stalk and has something called spores, which send out to make a new plant. So our next plant is a shrub, which is a small tree called sweet pepper bush. And this time of year, the sweet pepper bush's leaves are turning a nice red color. And the other cool thing about it is when the seeds are out, they look like little peppercorns, which is actually what you grind up to make pepper. So that's how this plant got its name. It gives off a flower that smells really sweet, and then the seeds look like little peppercorns. Our next plant is wintergreen, and it's actually a tiny shrub. It's only about 3 inches tall. They're not only found around vernal pools, but they're also common in the shady forest areas. Wintergreen has shiny green leaves, and they also give off a minty smell. It's actually where you find the oil to make wintergreen flavored gum and candies. They have white flowers in the spring and red berries in the summer that hold their seeds. They can also spread out by sending little shoots through the ground, up through the roots, and new plants will come out that way. So our next plant is called princess pine, and it's actually a moss like the other one that we were looking at earlier. So it grows out in mats, and you can really see it well here that it's all clustered together. So even though we think we can see like 20 different plants, that's all one plant, and it's sending up little shoots underneath the ground and sending up the leaves that way. The princess pine also, just like the other moss, doesn't make seeds, but instead has a spot that it gives off spores to reproduce. And we'll see if we can get some of the spores to come out just by shaking the plant. The next plant we're going to take a look at is called duckweed, and it's actually a very small plant that just lives on the surface of the water. We've actually gone to another vernal pool site on the same property, and this one it's much bigger and it does have water in it. So duckweed, unlike the mosses, actually does have roots, so they have roots that actually float down from the surface of the water. They're the smallest flowering plant, so that means that they have a flower each year. It's a very small little yellow flower that's so tiny I've actually never seen it. And they get their name because ducks like to eat the plant called duckweed, and they bring it from vernal pool to vernal pool because it gets all caught up on their wings and their feathers. And so when they fly from place to place, a little bit goes with them.
Here we are back in the office, and we brought our
duckweed that we got from the vernal pool back into the microscope so we can see it up close a little bit. So you can see it looks like little green circle plants that are floating on the water. There's even a couple little like Daphnia and other little insects swimming around in the water that we got from the vernal pool. You can see some of the roots if you look closely. We'll do a zoom in. So that's a nice, good close-up look at duckweed plants. You can see all the green inside the plant. That's how it makes its food, using the green chlorophyll that's inside their leaf. And they're still kind of a small little plant, even when you put it up in the big microscope. You can see a couple things swimming around in there. Pretty cool. We're also taking a close-up look at moss. We have right here that we brought back from the area around the vernal pool. We'll look at that on the microscope. And now you can really see all the different parts of the moss, the places, their little pores where they're taking in water and nutrients, their green leaves. You can try to flip the moss over so we can see underneath how we talked about how it does attach to the rocks, but it doesn't have roots like other plants do. So this is what underneath the moss plant looks like. So our final plant is skunk cabbage, and this time of year it's just looks like a little bulb coming out of the ground. In the summertime, in the spring, it gets really large leaves. That is where it gets its name cabbage from, because it looks like a big cabbage growing in the ground. It also gives off a smell like a skunk to attract flies to its flower, instead of giving off a nice smell and attracting maybe one of the nectar eaters like a butterfly or a bee. They also have a really cool life cycle that we will be teaching you more about in the future. All right, so we're going to go through the different life stages for the skunk cabbage, which is a plant that likes to grow around the edge of the vernal pool. They really like wet, moist soil, so they enjoy being around by the vernal pool because usually the soil around the vernal pool is nice and wet. So we'll start off the life cycle with the skunk cabbage seed, and this is a picture of what the skunk cabbage seed looks like. So once this dries up, little seeds will fall out of here and go into the ground, and then they'll start to grow and it'll be a new skunk cabbage plant. So once the seedling starts to grow, that's the new baby skunk cabbage plant. And there's actually a couple different stages in this picture. So this one right here, the really small little one, is the seedling. And the skunk cabbage seedling looks just like a little green leaf poking out of the undergrowth, or the little dead leaves that are on the ground. And then as the seedling starts to make more food for itself, because plants can turn the sunlight into their own food, it starts to grow bigger and becomes a young plant, or we also call that the juvenile plant. So it's not full adult size yet, but it's getting closer. Once it has lots of time to grow and gets lots of food, so it's nice and strong, it grows to its full size and becomes the skunk cabbage adult. And the adult gets to be pretty tall for a plant. It's probably about 2.5 feet tall. You can also tell how it got its name now by looking at those big leaves that are growing in the adult plant, because it does look like a cabbage when you're looking at it. Once it's been an adult, it's now time for it to put out its flowers. They actually do it the next year, not the first year that they're growing. So it looks like it's a little colder in this picture because it is actually the next year in the late winter. So the flower doesn't look pretty like we usually think flowers look. Instead, it has like a little hood shape, and instead of smelling sweet,
it smells kind of rotten. So it wants to attract maybe something like a fly or a beetle that would come over to something smelly instead of attracting a butterfly or something that would like to see the nectar in a flower. It decides to attract things that like smelly things. So you might not have thought of a fly being a pollinator, but for the skunk cabbage, it'll come into the skunk cabbage flower and get some of that white pollen on it, and then it flies to another one and it helps to cross pollinate so that we can have the seed again, and it starts the life cycle all over again for the skunk cabbage. We're going to do a skunk cabbage life cycle activity where you get to color in the different stages of the life cycle of the skunk cabbage. When you get your paper, the first thing you're going to do is to write your name, just like I did over here. There is a picture of a skunk cabbage flower in the center, so you could color that. And then we'll give you little cutouts that you can color and then paste into the correct order of the skunk cabbage's life cycle. We'll start off with the seed, then we'll go to the next stage, which would be the seedling. And then once that grows a little bit bigger, it would be the juvenile plant, and then the adult before it starts to flower the next year. So you can color those in and paste them in the correct order and then have them go in a circle, which makes kind of a cycle, which it is called the skunk cabbage life cycle. So see if you can put all of those together and make your own skunk cabbage life cycle.
So thanks for being great listeners to learn about all the different kinds of plants that we could find around the vernal pool. And we'll come back again, like I said, definitely in wintertime and check out and see how the vernal pool has changed over time. You can also make some predictions to what you think will happen for our next visit. If you think there might be some ice in the water, if there'll be water in the vernal pool, or maybe some snow around the outside. It's always good to make a prediction and see if you're right.